So let me set the stage. I'm 21, and my best friend, let's call her Sarah, is 19. We've been inseparable for almost 5 years now. I mean, we've been through everything together, the kind of friendship where we practically finish each other's sentences. But lately, things have shifted, and not in a good way. Sarah, she's always been the type who'd rather have any attention from a guy than none at all. It's like, no matter how bad the situation, she'll stick around if it means she's not alone. I've always suspected it's because of her parents. Her dad wasn't exactly father of the year material, distant, emotionally unavailable, the usual. And her mom? Well, she remarried a few years ago and is genuinely happy now, but Sarah, she's still stuck in this cycle of needing validation, especially from guys. Honestly, it worries the hell out of me. Everything changed last August when this guy, let's call him Jason, came into the picture. Sarah had just started her first semester in college, all excited about new beginnings and all that. At first, she was over the moon about Jason. She wouldn't stop talking about him, telling me how funny he was, how they clicked right away, all that crap. I didn't think much of it at the time because, new relationships can be exciting. I figured it was just the honeymoon phase, and eventually we'd get back to our usual routine of seeing each other almost every day. But that didn't happen. Instead, I started seeing less and less of her. Our spontaneous coffee dates, late-night fast food runs, and even just texting back and forth started to become rare. It was weird, and I'd be lying if I said it didn't hurt. We went from being super close to me barely hearing from her, and whenever we did hang out, she was always glued to her phone, texting Jason. It got to the point where I felt like I was third-wheeling, even when he wasn't around. So, fast forward 3 months into their relationship, I finally meet this dude. I'm not gonna lie, I was already a little on edge about the whole situation because of how much Sarah had changed, but I figured I'd give him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he was actually cool, and I was just being overprotective. Well, that was wishful thinking. We're at this small get-together, nothing fancy, just a few people hanging out. Sarah introduces me to Jason, and at first glance, he seems normal. I'm thinking, okay, maybe I was wrong. Maybe he's just a chill guy. But then, not even an hour into the night, he looks over at Sarah and says, "Why are you so fat?" I swear I had to do a double take. Like, what the actual fuck? Sarah is 5 feet 9 inches and 150 pounds. Perfectly healthy for her height. She's gorgeous, too, by the way. And this asshole has the nerve to call her fat? I could feel my blood boiling. I looked at Sarah, expecting her to clap back or something, but she just laughed it off like it was no big deal. She didn't even seem fazed. Meanwhile, I'm standing there, seething, wondering if I should say something or just let it slide. After all, maybe he was drunk, right? People say stupid shit when they're drunk, I get that. But that wasn't the only red flag. Oh no, the night only got worse from there. Later, Sarah and Jason get into this petty argument. I can't even remember what it was about. Probably something small and dumb, like whether they should have ordered pizza or Chinese food, or some other trivial bullshit. But Jason, he escalated it fast. He starts calling her a bitch over and over again, and not in a playful, teasing way. He was serious. At this point, I'm sitting on the couch, watching this unfold, and my hands are shaking. I could feel my patience wearing thin, which is rare for me. Like, I work with toddlers for a living. I'm the queen of keeping my cool in chaotic situations. But this guy? He was pushing all my buttons. Jason's wasted at this point, by the way. Like, slurring his words, can't sit up straight, kind of drunk. And Sarah? She's just sitting there, taking it like she's used to it, or something. I could see it in her eyes. This wasn't the first time he'd talked to her like that. And that's what broke me. I couldn't stay quiet anymore. I stood up and was like, "Hey, you can't talk to her like that." Jason just looks at me, and you know what he does? He fucking laughs. He actually laughs in my face like I'm the one being ridiculous. I've never wanted to punch someone more in my entire life. His sloppy, drunken grin made my blood boil. He thought this was all a joke, like it didn't matter that he was degrading Sarah right in front of me. And the worst part, Sarah didn't say a word. She just sat there, looking between us like she didn't know whose side to take. I was pissed, beyond pissed. Honestly, I was ready to blow up at this guy, but I could tell Sarah was embarrassed, so I held back. I didn't want to make things worse for her, even though she didn't seem to realize how bad things already were. The rest of the night was a blur. Jason eventually passed out on the couch, and I stayed up with Sarah, trying to talk to her about what happened. But she brushed it off like it was nothing. He didn't mean it, she said. He was just drunk. I've heard that excuse a million times before, and it pissed me off even more that she was defending him. But I didn't push it. I figured she'd come to her senses eventually, once she sobered up and saw the situation for what it was. But she didn't. That was the beginning of the end of our friendship as I knew it. After that night, things between us were never the same. I kept trying to reach out to her, trying to hang out like we used to, but she was always with Jason. And when we did hang out, he was all she talked about. It was like she was obsessed with him, even though he was treating her like absolute shit. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to confront her, tell her she deserved better, but another part of me didn't want to push her away. I thought maybe if I just stuck around, she'd see the red flags on her own and leave him. But as the months went on, it became clear that wasn't going to happen. Sarah was in too deep. So I'm standing there, fists clenched, watching Jason. This pathetic excuse for a human being, slouch in his chair, too drunk to even sit up straight. He's laughing at me, this sloppy, shit-eating grin plastered on his face. And I'm just seething. This guy really thinks it's hilarious that I'm pissed at him for calling Sarah a bitch over and over again, like it's some kind of joke. And Sarah? She's sitting there, quiet as ever, not saying a word to defend herself. I don't lose my cool easily. Like, it takes a lot to get me genuinely angry. I work with toddlers, okay? If you can survive tantrums and snotty noses on a daily basis without losing your sanity, you've pretty much mastered the art of patience. But this guy, he was pushing me to the limit. Stop laughing, I snapped at him, raising my voice more than I usually would. I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks, and my heart was pounding in my chest. But Jason, he just kept laughing like I was the crazy one. At that moment, I wanted to scream at him, tell him to go fuck himself, but instead, I took a deep breath and decided to pull Sarah aside. I didn't want to make a scene in front of everyone else, and besides, I knew it wouldn't get through to him. He was too far gone, drunk and clueless. So I grabbed Sarah by the arm and gently pulled her into the hallway, away from everyone else. Sarah, what the hell is going on? I whispered, trying to keep my voice calm, but firm. You can't let him talk to you like that. And that's when she dropped the bombshell. She told me that she'd been recording their arguments on her phone, recording them because they were so bad, so toxic, that she felt like she needed to protect herself. She didn't say it outright, but the implication was clear. She was scared. Scared enough to feel like she needed evidence, like things could get so out of hand that she'd need proof of how bad it was. My stomach dropped when she told me that. I mean, I'd known Jason was a dick from the start, but this was way worse than I'd realized. I wanted to scream, to shake her, and tell her to get the fuck out of this relationship, but instead, I just stood there, my mind racing. I didn't know what to say. How do you tell your best friend that the person she's with is a ticking time bomb, that she's in danger, and doesn't even see it? I'm fine, she said, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. We argue, but we always make up. He's not like that all the time. I didn't believe her, but what could I say? I could tell she didn't want to hear it, didn't want to admit how bad things really were. So I just nodded, my heart sinking, and we went back into the room where Jason was still half conscious, grinning like an idiot. And just like that, they made up. like it never happened, just brushed it under the rug, and I didn't see him again for months. But I couldn't stop thinking about what she'd said. Those recordings. The fact that she felt like she needed to have some kind of evidence in case things went too far. It haunted me. Honestly, I wanted to help her, to be there for her, but she wouldn't let me. Every time I tried to bring it up after that night, she'd just change the subject or laugh it off, like it wasn't a big deal. So I let it go, or at least I tried to. Months passed before I saw Jason again, and when I did, I hoped things had changed. Maybe they'd worked through their issues, or maybe, just maybe, Sarah had finally seen the light and dumped his ass. But nope, there he was, still in the picture. The next time I saw him, it was another small gathering. And surprise, surprise, he was drunk again. Not as wasted as that first time, but still enough that he was slurring his words and acting like an idiot. But here's the kicker. He actually apologized to me for how he acted that first night. "I'm sorry about what happened last time," he said, with this fake-ass sincerity that I didn't buy for a second. But I wasn't in the mood to start a fight, so I just nodded and said, "It's fine," even though it really wasn't. I wanted to believe that maybe he was just a dick when he drank too much, that maybe he wasn't as bad when he was sober. I wanted to believe that for Sarah's sake. So I brushed it off, telling myself that it was just a drunken rage that night, and maybe it wouldn't happen again. But of course, I was wrong, because later in the night, Jason started running his mouth again. This time, he wasn't just insulting Sarah, he was going after her friends. We were all sitting around just talking when out of nowhere, Jason starts referring to some of Sarah's friends as bitches, whores, and sluts. Keep in mind, this is his first time meeting most of these people, and he's already throwing out insults like he knows them. I was speechless. Like, seriously? Who the fuck talks like that about people they've just met? I glanced over at Sarah, hoping she'd shut him down, but she just sat there, looking uncomfortable but saying nothing. And the other girls? They just kind of laughed awkwardly, not sure how to react. I wanted to explode. I wanted to tell him to get the fuck out and never come back, but instead, I took a deep breath and said, "Hey man, don't say that stuff. It's not cool." I kept my tone calm, trying not to escalate things, but inside, I was fuming. Jason just shrugged and muttered some half-assed apology, but I could tell he didn't mean it. He wasn't sorry. He didn't care. And that was the problem. It was like watching the same thing happen all over again. He'd act like an asshole. Everyone would get uncomfortable. And then somehow, he'd weasel his way out of it without any real consequences. And Sarah? She was stuck in the middle, too afraid or too blind to do anything about it. After that night, I knew I had to talk to her, really talk to her, about what was going on. I couldn't just sit by and watch this guy tear her down over and over again. But every time I tried to bring it up, she'd brush me off, telling me it wasn't as bad as it looked, that I didn't need to worry. But I did worry, because I knew that this wasn't just some random rough patch. This was a pattern, and I could feel it in my gut. Things were only going to get worse. It was supposed to be a chill night for me. Sarah and Jason were going to this party, one of those frat-adjacent things where everyone pretends they're more into the music and the drinks than they actually are. Sarah had just rushed to sorority, and she was still trying to fit in with these new girls she didn't know well. Honestly, I was glad she was trying to branch out. After everything I'd seen between her and Jason, I thought it might be good for her to meet new people, maybe get some distance from him. I dropped them both off at the party and told her to text me if she needed anything. She smiled, that same fake, forced smile I've been seeing a lot of lately. Jason, of course, barely acknowledged me. He was already in his own world, scanning the crowd of people even as I dropped them off. But I didn't care. I figured I'd leave them to it and go back home to have a quiet night. I was tired. Dealing with other people's drama had me worn out, and after the last time I saw Jason, I wasn't in any mood for another confrontation. All I wanted was to kick back, maybe watch some Netflix and relax. But that night wasn't going to be relaxing. About 2 hours after dropping them off, I got the first text from Sarah. At first, I didn't think much of it. She texted me random stuff all the time. I was expecting maybe a funny meme or something about how the party was going. But when I opened the message, my stomach dropped. He's talking to other girls. Like, right in front of me. I stared at my phone for a moment, trying to process what I just read. Was she serious? I mean, Jason was a dick, sure. But blatantly hitting on other girls while Sarah was at the same party? Even for him, that seemed next level scummy. Before I could respond, another message popped up. He's cuddling with one of them on the couch. I don't even know her. My mind started racing. Cuddling? I couldn't believe what I was reading. What the fuck was this guy doing? I knew things weren't great between them, but this was a whole new level of disrespect. And Sarah was just sitting there, watching it happen. I could feel my blood boiling. I knew she was probably feeling devastated, but what could I do from my couch? Then came the third message, this time with a picture attached. In the dim light of the party, I could clearly see Jason sitting on a couch with some random girl practically draped over him. His arm was around her, and he looked completely comfortable, like this was just a regular Saturday night for him. Meanwhile, Sarah's text that followed was filled with raw emotion. I'm fucking done with this shit. I didn't blame her. I texted back immediately, asking if she was okay, and if she needed me to come pick her up. But before I even hit send, I got another text. I left. I'm going back. My heart sank. She left? By herself? I had no idea where she was or what was going through her head at that moment. But I knew one thing. This wasn't going to end well. I wanted to call her, but something stopped me. I guess I figured she needed space, time to cool off, and figure out what she was going to do. But my gut told me this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I stared at my phone, helpless. I didn't know what had happened after she left the party or what was going through her head, but I knew it wasn't good. Not with the state she was in. Sarah was emotional at the best of times, and when it came to Jason, those emotions ran deep. I tried distracting myself for a bit, scrolling through my phone, but I couldn't stop thinking about her. Part of me was furious at Jason. How could he be so blatantly disrespectful? But another part of me was just worried. What was Sarah going to do? I knew she wasn't one to back down from a fight, especially when it came to Jason. If she went back to that party, I could only imagine what would go down. An hour passed, then another. My phone stayed silent, and I tried to convince myself that no news was good news. Maybe she'd gone back to the party, pulled him aside, and they were hashing things out. Or maybe she was already at home, venting to someone else. But in the pit of my stomach, I knew something was wrong. At around 3 a.m., my phone buzzed again. But this time, it wasn't Sarah. It was a call from one of her other friends, someone I barely knew, but recognized as one of her sorority sisters. She lived 6 hours away, and it struck me as odd that she'd be calling me in the middle of the night. What the hell? I muttered to myself as I picked up the phone. Hello. Hey, I know it's late, but something's wrong with Sarah. The voice on the other end was shaky, and I could hear the urgency in her tone. Immediately, I sat up straight on my couch. What do you mean? What happened? She called me like an hour ago, screaming and crying. I don't know all the details, but I think it has to do with Jason. The people she's with are really worried about her. They called the police. My heart was in my throat. The police? Why, she got thrown into an Uber with people she didn't know. No one at the party wanted to deal with her. I guess. She was freaking out so bad they didn't know what to do. The Uber driver called the cops because he thought she was having a breakdown or something. Wait, what the fuck? Where is she now? I don't know. I thought you should know. I'm 6 hours away and can't do anything. Okay, thanks for letting me know. I'll handle it. I hung up, my mind racing. I couldn't believe this was happening. Sarah had left the party, come back, and now she was apparently losing it to the point where the Uber driver called the police. What the hell had gone down between her and Jason? I grabbed my keys and rushed out the door, heading to her apartment. My heart was pounding the entire time. I couldn't stop thinking about what I was going to find when I got there. Was she okay? Had the police taken her somewhere? Was she even at her apartment? When I finally pulled up to her building, the scene was surreal. There were police cars parked out front, lights flashing, but it wasn't chaotic. It was strangely calm. I spotted Sarah standing near the entrance, talking to an officer, but something was off. She wasn't at her apartment building. She was at the wrong building altogether. I jumped out of my car and rushed over. As I got closer, I saw her trying to open the door to one of the apartments, except it wasn't her apartment. She was banging on the door, fumbling with the handle like she was trying to break in. "Sarah," I called out, running over to her. "Sarah, stop." She turned around, her face a mess of tears and mascara. Her eyes were wide, almost manic, and for a second she didn't even seem to recognize me. My heart broke just looking at her. I had never seen her like this before. "I need to get in," she mumbled, her voice trembling. "I need to get in." "That's not your apartment," I said gently, stepping closer. "Come on, let's go." "You're at the wrong building." She blinked, looking around in confusion like she was seeing her surroundings for the first time. "What? No, this is my place." "No, it's not. Your building's over there. Come on, let's get you home." I reached out to guide her, but she jerked away from me, shaking her head frantically. "No, no, no. I need to get in. I need to find him." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Him. Jason. This was all about him. Whatever had gone down at that party had broken something inside her. And now she was here, trying to break into a random apartment because, in her mind, she thought Jason was in there. "Sarah, listen to me. He's not here. You're not in the right place." At that moment, one of the officers stepped forward, his face softening as he saw me trying to calm her down. "Are you her friend?" he asked quietly. "Yeah," I nodded, my voice barely above a whisper. "She's had a rough night. We didn't want to take her in," the officer explained. "She's clearly upset, but she hasn't done anything illegal, just a bit confused. We were hoping someone who knew her could help get her home." I looked back at Sarah. She had stopped trying to break into the apartment, but she was still a mess, staring at the door like she expected Jason to magically appear on the other side. I could feel the tears stinging the back of my eyes, but I held them back. I needed to stay strong for her right now. "Thank you," I said to the officer. "I'll make sure she gets home." He nodded, stepping back to give us some space as I gently took Sarah by the arm. She didn't fight me this time. She was too tired, too emotionally drained to resist. I guided her to the correct building, which was just a few doors down, and helped her up the stairs to her apartment. Once we were inside, she collapsed onto the couch, her body shaking with silent sobs. I sat down beside her, not saying anything for a while. I didn't know what to say. What do you say to your best friend when she's been through something like this? When she's hit rock bottom because of some toxic, manipulative asshole who doesn't care about her the way she deserves to be cared for? After a few minutes, I finally found my voice. "Sarah, what happened tonight?" She didn't answer at first. She just stared at the floor, her fingers gripping the edge of the couch like she was holding on for dear life. Then finally, she spoke. "He was with them. Those girls. He didn't even care that I was there. He just kept going, kept talking to them, touching them like I wasn't even in the room. And when I tried to say something, he laughed at me. Everyone laughed at me. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to leave." Her voice cracked, and she started crying again. Harder this time. I went back because I wanted to confront him. I wanted him to look me in the eye and tell me why. Why he keeps doing this to me. But he didn't care. He didn't even look at me. My heart shattered for her. This wasn't just a bad night. This was the culmination of months, maybe even years, of emotional abuse, manipulation, and control. Jason had broken her down piece by piece, and tonight was the breaking point. "I can't keep doing this," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I can't keep living like this." And that's when I knew this wasn't just about Jason anymore. This was about Sarah, about her finally realizing that she deserved better, that she didn't have to put up with this shit anymore. "You don't have to," I said softly, wrapping my arm around her. "You deserve so much more than this." She didn't respond, but I could feel her body relax, just a little, as if some part of her finally believed me. We sat there in silence for a long time, the weight of the night pressing down on both of us. I didn't know what was going to happen next, but one thing was clear. Things couldn't go on like this. Something had to change. The next day, I got a text from Sarah, and to no one's surprise, she was back with him. I stared at my phone, my stomach sinking. I don't know why I even expected anything different. This had become the norm for her and Jason, the toxic cycle of breaking up and getting back together, with him gaslighting her and her thinking it was just another bump in the road. It hurt to see her like that, but I couldn't control her decisions, no matter how much I wanted to shake some sense into her. I mean, I knew enough about their relationship to know it wasn't safe for her to be with him, mentally or emotionally, but I didn't know the full extent. And every time I tried to intervene, she'd brush it off, telling me I didn't understand Jason, that I was overreacting, or that he wasn't like that all the time. I knew better. I'd seen the red flags, plain as day. I'd been there the night he called her a bitch in front of everyone. I'd heard him laugh off my anger like it was some joke. And let's not forget the night she told me she recorded their fights for her own safety. Like, what the fuck? But despite all that, Sarah stayed with him. And I was stuck on the sidelines, watching my best friend sink deeper into this mess. I saw Sarah and Jason a few more times in the weeks after that, usually at social events or group hangouts. Every time, I tried to be civil, tried to be the supportive friend. I didn't want to push her away. And I knew that if I made her choose between him and me, she'd probably choose him. So I kept quiet, even when he said rude shit or made her feel like crap. I gritted my teeth and brushed it off, because losing Sarah was the last thing I wanted. But then came this past weekend, and everything blew up again. It was a Saturday, and my school had a big football game. I was hyped, excited to hang out with my friends, enjoy the game, and just let loose a little. It was one of those perfect fall days where everyone's out tailgating, the air smells like barbecue, and the whole campus feels alive. I was walking toward the student line, getting ready to head into the stadium, when I spotted Jason out of the corner of my eye. He was standing there by himself, looking a little out of it. No surprise there. But Sarah? Nowhere to be found. My heart skipped a beat, and I immediately felt that familiar knot of worry in my chest. Whenever I saw Jason without Sarah, my mind jumped to the worst-case scenario. I walked over to him, trying to keep things casual, but the second I was close enough to see his face, I knew something was off. "Hey," I said, trying to act like everything was normal. "Where's Sarah?" Jason shrugged, looking down the street, like he didn't give a shit. "No idea," he muttered. "She just ran off." My stomach dropped. Ran off? What did he mean by that? I pulled out my phone and started blowing up Sarah's phone, sending text after text, trying to figure out where she was. I looked back at Jason, who was just standing there like a useless sack of shit, and I could feel my patience wearing thin. "What do you mean she ran off? Did something happen?" He just mumbled something incoherent, clearly drunk out of his mind. Again. This was the constant theme with Jason. I don't think I've ever had a conversation with the guy when he was sober. Every time I saw him, he was wasted, slurring his words, and causing trouble. Today was no different. Finally, Sarah texted me back. Her message was short, but it said everything I needed to know. "I left him. He's a fucking asshole." I sighed. Knowing this was just the beginning of another long, painful night. I texted back, asking where she was, but she didn't reply. Meanwhile, Jason was standing there like a lost puppy, completely unaware, or maybe he just didn't care, that his girlfriend had stormed off and was probably in tears somewhere. I knew I had to find her, but before I could even start walking, Jason started talking again. "She just left," he said, his words slurred. "Fucking bitch ran off. Probably sucking someone's dick on her way back to the apartment." I stopped dead in my tracks. I turned to look at him, my fists clenching at my sides. Did he just say what I thought he said? My blood was boiling, and I had half a mind to punch him right there in the street, but I knew better. Getting into a fight with this guy wouldn't help Sarah. It would just make things worse. "Don't fucking talk about her like that," I snapped, glaring at him. He just laughed, that stupid, drunken laugh of his that made me want to hit something. I turned away from him and started walking, determined to find Sarah and make sure she was okay. I couldn't deal with him right now, not when Sarah needed me. After a few minutes, I saw Sarah walking toward me. Her face was red, and I could tell she'd been crying. My heart sank. I hated seeing her like this, broken down, hurt, and struggling to hold herself together. I rushed over to her, and she collapsed into my arms, sobbing. "I can't fucking do this anymore," she cried, her voice muffled against my shoulder. "He's such an asshole. He was calling me a bitch in front of everyone. Again. I'm so done with him." I hugged her tight, trying to comfort her, but I knew there wasn't much I could say. She'd been through this so many times before, and every time she ended up back in the same place with Jason. It was like she couldn't break free, no matter how badly he treated her. We started walking back toward her apartment, and after a few minutes, I realized Jason was following us. I glanced over my shoulder and saw him stumbling along behind us, still drunk, still a complete mess. Great, just what we needed. He caught up with us, and that's when things really started to escalate. He was pissed, angry in that dangerous, unpredictable way that made my skin crawl. He started yelling at Sarah, calling her names, accusing her of cheating on him, saying the most vile shit. "You fucking whore," he shouted. "Who were you with? Whose dick were you sucking?" I stopped walking, my blood boiling again. I couldn't just let this slide. "Hey, back the fuck off," I said, stepping in front of Sarah. She didn't do anything wrong, but Jason wasn't listening. He just kept yelling, his voice growing louder, more aggressive. He was slurring his words, his eyes wild, and I could tell he was on the verge of losing control. "You don't know shit," he screamed at me, his face inches from mine. "Stay the fuck out of this." At this point, Sarah was crying again, and I was trying to keep my cool, but it was getting harder by the second. I wanted to protect her, to get her away from this toxic asshole, but I also knew that getting physical wouldn't solve anything. We made it back to her apartment, and Jason followed us inside. The second we were through the door, the yelling started up again. This time, it was worse. Jason was raging, his voice echoing through the small space as he hurled insults at Sarah. She was yelling back, trying to defend herself, but I could tell she was scared. I stood there, caught in the middle of their screaming match, unsure of what to do. Part of me wanted to just grab Sarah and get her out of there, but I didn't want to escalate things even further. I needed to find a way to calm Jason down before things got worse. "What the fuck are you even mad about?" I asked, stepping between them. "Why are you acting like this?" Jason turned his drunken gaze on me, his eyes narrowing. For a moment, I thought he might actually hit me. But then he laughed, a low, bitter laugh that sent a chill down my spine. "I'm laughing at the fucking football game," he said, the words dripping with sarcasm and spite. I felt a wave of anger crash over me. He was mocking me, mocking Sarah, mocking everything. It was infuriating. Here I was trying to help, trying to mediate, and he had the audacity to laugh in my face like this was all some big joke. It was so fucking disrespectful. "That's enough," I said, my voice sharp. "You need to leave. Now." But Jason didn't leave. He just stood there, staring me down, daring me to do something. I glanced at Sarah, who was wiping tears from her face, and my heart broke for her. How did it get to this point? How did my best friend end up with someone who treated her like garbage, who made her feel worthless? Please, just go, Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. I can't do this anymore. For a second, it looked like Jason might actually listen. He wavered on his feet, swaying slightly as he processed her words. But then he shook his head, stumbling toward the door in a drunken haze. You're both fucking crazy, he muttered. Things had already hit rock bottom. Or at least I thought they had. After all the chaos at the football game and the explosive fight that followed, I figured maybe Sarah would finally be done with Jason. She seemed so broken, so fed up with his constant manipulation and abuse. But I was wrong. Every time I thought it couldn't get worse, it did. The next day, I was still reeling from what had happened. Jason had pushed her buttons again and again, calling her a whore, accusing her of cheating in front of everyone like it was nothing. Sarah was crying, he was shouting, and I was left in the middle trying to keep things from escalating. The situation had felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. But what really threw me off was that Sarah somehow was still with him after everything he'd done. The gaslighting, the insults, the public humiliation. She couldn't break free. It didn't make sense to me, but it was as if Jason had this terrifying hold over her, something deeper than just emotional manipulation, something that made her feel like she couldn't live without him, even though he was destroying her piece by piece. That night, my boyfriend joined us at her apartment. We were sitting outside, just trying to calm down after the insane events of the weekend. We were all emotionally exhausted. Me from watching my best friend get torn apart by someone who was supposed to love her, and her from the endless cycle of abuse. We weren't really talking about anything serious, just trying to decompress, when suddenly we heard it, a scream. Not just any scream, but this blood-curdling, desperate scream from inside her apartment. Jason, stop. Sarah's voice rang out, filled with fear, rage, and raw emotion. My heart dropped into my stomach. Without even thinking, my boyfriend, and I rushed inside. My first instinct was pure panic. What the fuck was happening in there? Was he hurting her? Was she okay? I could feel my pulse racing as we pushed through the door and saw them. Jason towering over her, his face twisted in anger, and Sarah standing her ground, but clearly terrified. Get the fuck out of here, I shouted at Jason. My boyfriend stood beside me, ready to step in if things got physical. Jason, still drunk and fuming, hesitated for a second before laughing, this low, bitter laugh that chilled me to the bone. But eventually he staggered toward the door, muttering under his breath, and left. I slammed the door behind him, locking it, as if that would somehow keep him out of Sarah's life for good. I knew it wouldn't, but for now, at least, we had a little bit of peace. I turned to Sarah. She was shaking, her face pale, eyes wide and filled with tears. I guided her to sit down on the couch, and my boyfriend stood nearby, his face tight with concern. I sat next to her, wrapping my arm around her shoulders, trying to comfort her, but I could feel how tense she was, like a rubber band stretched so far it was about to snap. Sarah, what the hell happened? I asked, my voice gentle but firm. You can't keep doing this. He's dangerous. She didn't say anything at first, just wiped her eyes and stared at the floor. I could feel her hesitation, like she was holding something back, something huge. And then, suddenly, the floodgates opened. Sarah started spilling everything. It was like she'd been holding this all in for so long, and now that Jason wasn't around to control her, to manipulate her into silence, she couldn't stop. She told me about how Jason had been weighing her every week. Every fucking week, like she was some object he could control. If she wasn't 140 pounds by the end of the week, he'd threaten to break up with her. He'd say things like, "If you don't lose the weight, we're done. And nobody's going to want you if you look like that." And what made it even worse was that Sarah had struggled with an eating disorder for years. She'd been in and out of therapy trying to heal, but Jason didn't care. He used it against her. Every pound became a weapon. My stomach twisted in anger and disgust as she talked. I couldn't believe this was real. How could someone who claimed to love her be so cruel, so controlling? It was sick. It made my skin crawl. He doesn't let me leave the house unless he knows where I'm going, Sarah continued, her voice shaky. And I'm not allowed to hang out with my friends unless he approves it. He even has to look at what I'm wearing before I go out. I felt like I was going to throw up. This wasn't just emotional abuse. This was full-blown control. Jason had taken over every aspect of her life, making sure she couldn't even breathe without his permission. It was terrifying. And the worst part, Sarah seemed to think this was normal, like it was just something she had to deal with in a relationship. He called me earlier, she whispered, her voice so low I almost didn't hear her. What did he say? I asked, even though I already knew it couldn't be good. He threatened to kill himself, she said, her voice breaking. He said if I didn't come see him right now, he was going to end it. My heart dropped. Jason had crossed the line so many times, but this was fucking unforgivable. Threatening to kill himself to manipulate her into coming back to him, that wasn't love. That was pure, toxic control. And it was working. I could see the conflict in Sarah's eyes, the guilt, the fear. She didn't want to be with him, but she was afraid of what would happen if she didn't go. You're not going, I said firmly. He's manipulating you. He's not going to do anything to himself. He just wants to control you. I know, she whispered, tears rolling down her cheeks. I know, but it's so hard. He makes me feel like I'm responsible for him. Like if something happens to him. It's my fault. It's not your fault, I said, squeezing her hand. None of this is your fault. You deserve so much better than this. She nodded, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. Jason had worn her down so much that she couldn't even see the truth anymore. It was heartbreaking, but for that moment, at least she stayed strong. She didn't go to him, despite his constant calls and texts begging her to come over, threatening more and more outrageous things. We sat in silence for a while, just letting her breathe, letting her feel like she was safe. But then later that night, while we were out with some friends, Jason called her again. He was relentless, like a predator stalking his prey. This time, he said he was at her house and demanded she come meet him. I could see the panic in Sarah's face the moment she read the text. She looked at me, her eyes wide, as if asking for permission. Sarah, don't go, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Please, you know what he's going to do. It's just going to be the same thing all over again. But deep down, I knew it was useless. Jason had his claws so deep into her that nothing I said would matter. She was going to go, no matter what. I could feel myself losing hope, the frustration bubbling up inside me as I realized that no matter how much I tried, no matter how much I wanted to save her from this, I couldn't. Not if she wasn't ready to save herself. At 1 a.m., I got a text from Sarah. He's being arrested. My heart skipped a beat. What the fuck? He laid his hands on me. I called the police. I stared at my phone in shock. I couldn't believe it had escalated to this. But at the same time, I could. Jason had been spiraling for so long, it was only a matter of time before things got physical. I texted her back immediately, asking if she was okay, but she didn't respond. I felt sick, like I should have been there, like I should have done more to stop this from happening. But I knew deep down that it wasn't on me. It was on Jason. He was the one who had pushed things to this point. He was the one who had hurt her. Sunday morning rolled around, and I was still shaken up from the night before. I didn't sleep. I couldn't stop thinking about Sarah, about what had happened. I was hoping, praying that maybe, finally, this would be it, that she'd be done with him for good after this. But 2 hours after Jason was released from jail, she was back with him. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. How could she go back to him after everything? After he hit her? After he'd been arrested for it? I couldn't wrap my head around it. It was like she was addicted to him, like no matter how much he hurt her, she couldn't stay away. And it killed me to watch her go through this,